Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Mike, a new ice cream explorer. A couple years ago, I was gifted an ice cream maker that has gone, we'll say, underutilized. Not entirely unused, but mostly it was broken out for special occasions or group gatherings and stuff like that. But I'd like to change that. See, recently I've undergone an inspiration and would like to set out on a journey, experience an ice cream renaissance, embark on an exploration. What, though, is an explorer without their maps? An explorer, that's what. Explorers draw their own path. They don't follow the predetermined roads. They make their own recipes, not copy what's already out there. On this channel, I hope to carve my own path through the world of ice cream. I'd like to try those conventional means of production as well as try some less conventional. I'd like to make my own mistakes so that I can learn why the best practices are, well, the best practices. And who knows, maybe we'll stumble upon a recipe that actually tastes very good, that normally wouldn't have been thought of. If that concept interests you, I would like to encourage you to like and subscribe to the channel so you can join me on this exploration, as well as make more ice cream than any one person should reasonably be making. With that, let's get into the episode. Now, where did my notes land? After sifting through dozens of recipes to make sure this next statement isn't wrong, I've learned that ice cream usually consists of a base 3 to 4 ingredients. First, you start with milk. Then, you add some cream. And finally, you have sugar. You could argue that vanilla extract is a foundational ingredient, but aside from flavor, it doesn't really contribute much to the ice cream making process. So for this episode, I really want to look at these key ingredients, the sort of foundation of ice cream. After going through a bunch of recipes to get an idea of this episode, I've learned that ice cream usually blends different ratios of these particular ingredients, but also cooks them in different fashions too. So with that, let's get into the batch breakdown. Today, I'm going to be making 6 batches. The first batch is going to be a sort of balance of all of the batches. You're going to have 1 part cream, 1 part milk, and then you're going to have some sugar and vanilla extract that's going to maintain consistent throughout all of the batches. Batch 2 and 3 are going to be messing with those ratios. So batch 2 is going to be 2 parts milk, 1 part cream, with the same amount of sugar, same amount of vanilla extract. Batch 3 is going to be the reverse of that. So you're going to have 1 part milk, 2 parts cream. And then again, same sugar, same vanilla extract. For batches 1 through 3, I'm going to be cold mixing. And that means I'm just going to take the cream, the milk, the sugar, the vanilla extract, put it into a bowl, whisk, and put it into my ice cream maker. Nothing else done to it. This is where batch 4 comes in different. Batch 4 is going to look like batch 1 in terms of its ingredient composition. You're going to have 1 part cream, 1 part milk, and then the sugar vanilla extract. But the difference with batch 4 is I'm going to be cooking that cream and milk mixture. I'm going to be putting it into a pan, simmering it, and then incorporating the sugar into that mixture to help melt that sugar and sort of create a nice spread, a nice even sort of sugary flavor to that mixture. From there, I'll take it, put it into a bowl, refrigerate it before eventually putting it into my ice cream maker. Batch 5 is going to actually add an ingredient. What I'm going to do, same as batch 1 and batch 4, I'm going to take 1 part cream, 1 part milk, sugar vanilla extract, but this time I'm going to add egg yolk. And for those of you that don't know, much like me before looking into this episode, this is what's known as a custard. Custard is basically just ice cream with egg yolk. What I'm going to do, much like with batch 1 and batch 4, is I'm going to take the milk and cream, put it into a saucepan and start getting it simmering. And on the side, I'm going to mix my egg yolk and sugar and then slowly incorporate that milk and cream mixture into the egg. And then from there, I'll put that back on and warm it up just a little bit to make sure that the eggs are safe to eat without carrying any undesirable sort of contaminants. And from there, Much like with batch 4, I'm going to put it in the fridge, allow it to cool before putting it into my ice cream maker. Batch 6 is where things are going to go a little awry. Seeing as how ice cream is milk and cream, and for most of these batches I'm just doing half and half, I figured why not just try using half and half? So batch 6 is going to be that. I'm just going to use half and half with no extra added cream or milk, as well as the same amount of sugar and vanilla extract. Now, I understand that there are a wide variety, dozens of different things that you can do with just those foundational ingredients. You can try swapping the granular sugar for powdered sugar. You can work with milk alternatives like coconut milk or almond milk. You could even work with evaporated milk or condensed milk. But for this episode, this is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to mix with ratios and method of cooking. I'm not going to go into any of that extra stuff this episode, because I don't have that much time or freezer space for all of that ice cream. So with that, let's get to making some ice cream. Now, this is where the difficult part comes in. See, one of my critiques I have with cooking shows is you never really know what it tastes like. You know, you've got some good judges and good, hosts that do a good job of sort of explaining what the things taste like. But at the end of the day, I don't really know what that dish tastes like and whether or not I'm going to like it. And that's the issue I've kind of run into with making a show like this, is I'm making ice cream and then talking about how it tastes. So here's what I'm going to do to sort of work around that. Each episode, I'm going to make a baseline batch. This is a batch that's usually the most common kind of recipe out there. Take vanilla ice cream. Vanilla ice cream is just milk, cream, sugar, vanilla extract. A very common recipe that you taste more or less everywhere, whether it's your grocery store frozen food aisle or it's a Dairy Queen or other sort of soft serve ice cream place. It's a very common recipe that you probably have an understanding of what it tastes like already. From there, I'm going to be judging all of the other batches off of that baseline. So the goal is that if you have an understanding of what the baseline tastes like, which the intention is that you do, by talking about how these other batches, relate and the differences between them, hopefully you can get a better understanding of the difference that each batch and method of preparation makes. And then from there, you can decide whether or not it's something that you'd like to try in your own time. Each batch, I'm going to be judging off of 4 factors. First factor, again, creaminess and richness. How rich of a cream or fatty flavor does it have? The second factor is going to be the smoothness or texture. When it comes to, the granular sugar, you might be able to taste some of that sugar within a cold mixed batch. The third thing is going to be concentration of flavor. For this particular episode, I don't expect the concentration of flavor to change very much because it's the same thing between all of the batches. Same amount of sugar, same amount of vanilla extract. All that's really focused on this episode is the cream and the milk that come between all of the batches. So concentration of flavor is going to be that third sort of aspect. And the final aspect is going to be the ease of making. When it comes to the first 3 batches, it's very simple. Take the ingredients, put it into a bowl, mix it, put it in an ice cream maker. Batch 4 and 5 gets a little bit more complicated and it gets a little bit more difficult. And so that's one of the things that I've realized when looking at a lot of recipes when it comes to researching this episode is every recipe that's out there messes with one of those 4 categories to some degree or another. And so you may have a very complicated ice cream to make, such as the custard, and then from there, is the flavor worth that effort? And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. For this episode, my grading scale isn't going to be saying whether something is good or bad, because everybody has their own palate, everyone has different flavors, everyone has different likes. So when it comes to my grading, this is not an indictment about whether or not something tastes good or bad. Again, it's all a matter of preference. So let's start the tasting. Batch 1. Batch 1. Again, batch 1 is our baseline. This is the balance between all of the different ingredients that we have today. So again, 1 part cream, 1 part milk, and then sugar and vanilla extract. Let's give it a try. This is very interesting. Again, my mind immediately goes to trying to peg it as what it is, or peg it with what it relates to, because this is a little bit creamier, a little bit richer than a frozen ice cream that you would get from a grocery store. I would say it reminds me of Cold Stone sort of consistency. Not that I'm saying it tastes exactly like Cold Stone, because that's not true. But if you had like Cold Stone ice cream, you sort of know what that texture, that consistency of the ice cream is. And I would say this is probably the closest reference that I can think of if you've had Cold Stone ice cream. I know places like Dairy Queen, not necessarily this rich. I would say Dairy Queen is maybe sort of a step below this, but again, overall, not bad. Since this is our baseline, we're going to go right down the middle. So this is going to be a 5 in creaminess / richness. This is going to be a 5 in, well, this is 2. This is going to be a 5 in smoothness and texture. This is going to be a 5 sort of in the difficulty of creation. And then this is going to be a 5 in concentration of flavor. So with that, let's start testing the other batches. Batch 2. Again, batch 2 is our milk-heavy batch. So again, this is going to be 2 parts milk, 1 part cream, and then again, the vanilla extract and the sugar. So let's go give it a try. Yeah, so basing it off of, again, our baseline, you can feel the ice crystals a little bit more. Seeing as how it's more of a milk base than cream base, it freezes a lot, more crystally than the cream typically would. And that is a little bit more pronounced, just a tad. You can also, it goes down a lot smoother, you don't have as much cream, so I could probably go through this entire thing pretty easily. This is what I would most closely compare to frozen ice cream from like your typical grocery store, like Bayer's or stuff like that. If you want sort of your closest representation of frozen ice cream, this is probably it. Thinking back to the last batch, again, I know I referenced Dairy Queen. This is a little less concentrated than Dairy Queen. Like I would almost put frozen ice cream, Dairy Queen, batch 1. Or I guess batch 2, Dairy Queen, batch 1, if you're a fan of Dairy Queen. Again, not that this tastes like Dairy Queen, but this is, again, the closest comparable in terms of texture, creaminess, and so on and so forth. But overall, got another bite just to make sure. Overall, it's not as creamy, obviously. So I would probably peg it at a 3 in terms of its creaminess factor. Texture, again, I'm going to peg texture close to a 3 as well, because, again, it's got a little bit more of the ice crystals in it. It's a little bit I don't want to say grainier of a texture, but I mean, it's kind of almost grainier of a texture. And so we're probably going to peg that as maybe a 3 as well. Flavor concentration, still 5. Again, it tastes just as vanilla-y as the first batch. And the ease of production is just as easy. The ease of creation is just as easy as batch 1. Let's go on to batch 3. Batch 3. Again, batch 3 is our cream heavy batch. So this is going to be 1 part milk, 2 part cream, same sugar, same vanilla extract. I'm probably just going to stop with that at this point, but go ahead and give it a try. This is rich. You can really taste that cream. The big thing is I'm trying to draw a parallel, and I don't know if I've ever had ice cream this sort of rich out there. You know, it's too rich for frozen sort of grocery store. It's too rich for, you know, a lot of ice cream parlors or ice cream shops and stuff like that. I'm trying to think of like restaurants that might have had this as a dessert option, and I'm still having a hard time thinking of that. The big thing about this ice cream is I don't know if I could eat an entire bowl of this without having some degree of stomach pains. But, you know, as I sit here and try this, I think this would pair well with something else. You know, if you had like a slice of cake and some ice cream with it, you know, something that you aren't eating excessive amounts of it, you know, maybe a scoop or two of this to sort of really drive home another source of flavor for that sort of, you know, dessert. I think this is the type of ice cream that might work really well for that. In terms of rating, again, I think it's kind of just the opposite of batch 2, where we were doing a 3 for its creaminess. Like, this is creaminess, but at the same time, I could be creamier. It could be straight heavy whipping cream. So we'll probably peg this at about a 7 on the creaminess and richness scale. In terms of the smoothness and texture, this is pretty smooth as is. You know, it doesn't have a lot of texture that I can taste through the creaminess of the ice cream itself. So we'll probably also peg this as a 7 sort of on the smoothness texture scale. In terms of ease of creation, same as the last 2 batches, is going to be a 5 because it's just taking the ingredients, putting it in a bowl, mixing it, putting in the ice cream maker. Same with the concentration of flavor. It's pretty much just as vanilla-y as the prior batches. Let's move on to the next one. Batch 4. Again, just as a reminder, batch 4 is the same as batch 1 in terms of its ingredient makeup. So 1 cream, 1 milk, sugar, vanilla extract. But the difference is that this is cooked in a saucepan before you actually sort of put it into the ice cream maker. So let's go for it. You know, I'll be honest, after tasting this, I'm starting to reconsider my batch 1. Not that it's any, you know, not that it's disgusting or anything, but like I can taste a bit more smooth sort of texture. I don't feel as much as the little grains of sugar that I might have in the first one. And so, man, now I'm second guessing whether or not this is more Cold Stone-like than batch 1. Does Cold Stone melt their sugar into their milk and cream mixture? I need a Cold Stone insider to tell me these things. Overall, though, you know, I would say the creaminess is about just as creamy. I don't think cooking it changed the richness. I think the change that you see is primarily in that smoothness and texture. If I gave batch 1, you know, like a 5, this would probably be closer to a 6. You know, it's not a night and day sort of change. It's not, you know, extremely noticeable, but if you have, you know, say several batches of different ice creams lined up and you have them side by side, I think it becomes a little noticeable. But aside from that, the concentration of flavor, pretty much the same. I don't think cooking it has changed that in the slightest. But the difficulty to make is where you also see a major change, because this isn't as simple as just taking everything, putting it into a bowl, putting it into an ice cream maker. This involved a lot of cooking and a lot of waiting before you even put it into the ice cream maker. And then you have to, you know, go through the freezing process. So you really have to plan if you're going to do something like this. I'd probably peg it as a, you know, as a difficulty 7. You know, it just took time. I guess it wasn't necessarily difficult, but the complexity of making it definitely stepped up a couple notches. Let's move on to the next one. Batch number 5. Just as a reminder, though you can probably tell just from looking at it, this is the custard. And again, the difference between custard and other ice cream is just added egg yolk, which is why you sort of get that yellow sort of color or tint to the ice cream itself. But let's go ahead and give it a try. Yeah, again, I know that custards are creamier. You know, the whole point of adding the egg yolk is to get that sort of creamy flavor without adding, you know, that pain, that, you know, stomach painy sort of richness. You know, which makes me question my first category, lumping creaminess and richness in together. But one of the big things to note about this custard is the flavor. You know, I wasn't expecting the concentration of flavor to vary much between all of these batches, but I think the yolk does, you know, subtract from the flavor a bit. If I wanted this the same concentration of vanilla as I did with other sort of batches, I would need to add a lot more, or at least a noticeable amount more. You know, I would almost describe this ice cream as cakey. Like, I think, it reminds me more of a cake in sort of ice cream form. But if I had to, let me just double check. If I had to give a ranking or rating, I would say, again, creaminess, we're up to like an 8. This is really creamy sort of stuff. Not quite as rich, but it's creamy. The texture, I mean, we're probably looking at, you know, a 7. You know, it doesn't have a lot of the ice crystals. It doesn't have, you know, a lot of the texture issues that some of the cold mixing stuff in. And I don't think the egg yolk makes it any less smooth. It's a little denser, but overall, I'd still say it's pretty smooth. Again, the flavor concentration is where things take a little bit of a dip. I would say it's probably about a 3. Again, it's a pretty noticeable sort of lack of vanilla flavor, even though it's the same amount of vanilla that I put into this batch as the other batches. And then for the difficulty of creation, we're also kind of up to an 8, because again, it's the same thing that it was in batch 4, but the difference is you're mixing that into the egg yolks, which is a skill in and of itself. If you add it too quickly, you're going to cook the eggs, and if you take the eggs and just throw them into the mixture, you're also, again, you're going to cook the eggs and kind of have a rougher texture in the end product. But overall, I think this would be a good base for a lot of mix-in and other flavors that we do in the future. So we might have to tackle this again. Let's take a look at that final batch. Batch 6. I'm not going to lie, just right off the bat, one of the things I'm noticing is I can see the ice crystals a lot more clearly than I could with some of the other batches. All right, batch 6, again, the reminder, this is our 50/50 mixture. We didn't add any extra cream, no more extra milk, just 50/50 sugar, vanilla extract. Let's give it a try. You know, I was going to try and not, you know, say whether or not things taste good or bad, but I'm not going to lie, this doesn't taste great. You know, apparently 50/50 doesn't have as much cream as it does milk. It's not, I mean, if this ice cream is any indication, it's not really 50/50. You know, I can taste a lot more of the ice crystals in here. It's, you know, I don't even know if I would describe it as milk. It's more akin to like creamy sort of watered down cream with some sugar and vanilla extract. I mean, it's not absolutely atrocious, but it's probably something I'm not going to be making a lot of in the future. Overall, the creaminess, we're looking at probably a 2. Not very creamy at all. I mean, creaminess 1 would be straight water, which I think this isn't too far off of. Texture, I'm getting a lot of ice crystals. Again, I'm getting a lot of grainy, sort of crunchy texture in my ice cream. So we're probably looking at a 2 on the texture as well. Concentration of flavor, I mean, I guess it tastes like vanilla. I would say it's just as vanilla-y as, the rest of the batches if you can get past sort of the texture and creaminess issues. So we're still probably at about 5 on there. And I would say in terms of ease, we're probably a little bit easier since you don't have to measure out both cream and milk. You can just pour a half and half into, the mixture. We're probably, a little bit easier. So about, a 4 on the ease factor. But other than that, probably not going to be going back to the half and half ice cream in the future. So there you have it, folks. We've taken our first step out on this journey through the world of ice cream. Let me know what you thought in the comments. Let me know what your favorite flavors are. If you like preparing ice creams in different ways and stuff like that. Or again, your experience with ice cream, maybe an early memory of your first experience or maybe one of your favorite experiences. But again, overall, this was a good foundational understanding of these key ingredients. Hopefully going into the future, knowing these foundational ingredients, we can make the appropriate adjustments to different batches to make things, the tastiest that they can be. And again, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next journey.